ploughing that's been done and a bit of sowing going on this week is welcome. Conditions are fair. That's all you could say. I mean, look, lads are putting in winter wheat, certainly. And I suppose, they're picking their fields. There's little bits that you might have to lift the drill and stuff. I haven't seen anything yet that's really good enough for winter barley, and I suppose that's the big crux in the system, really.
Not enough winter cereals are in the ground at the moment, but with a small break in the weather, this area should increase over the next few days. But the weather needs to hold out. For the crops in the ground, most are in need of some attention around weed control. Is your crop ready for a herbicide application, or is it still too wet? You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. The cornerstone of weed control in winter cereals is pre-emerge herbicides. However, it may be too late for these products, and alternative strategies need to be devised. I'm delighted to be joined by Ciaran Collins and Shay Phelan, both tillage specialists in Teagasc, to discuss what are the best options for weed control in winter cereals over the coming weeks. Shay, I want to come to you first. Just in terms of planting, how much planting is done out there at the moment?
It's a good question, I suppose, Michael, and that's the $6 million question. I suppose everybody's wondering at the moment. I mean, we obviously know they're back, but I suppose how much they're back is anybody's guess at this stage. And I suppose at the last week we published the harvest report, and within that we put an estimate together of what's actually out in what's actually planted. And I suppose there's a big caveat to that in terms of we're based a lot of it on seed sales. So a lot of that is not actually planted yet. So we kind of estimate there's somewhere in the region of about 35,000 hectares of winter barley sown, which is, we're down from 53 last year. So it's a big decrease. And winter wheat could be anywhere around the same, but I suppose there's probably still time to plant winter wheat. So what seed is out there, we reckon there could be, potentially 45, maybe 50,000 hectares of winter wheat seed could go in. And I kind of have an asterisk beside that in terms of that's what's being planted between now and probably early February, which technically, I suppose, once it goes after the 1st of January, is spring wheat. But winter wheat varieties, I suppose, we could be up as high as 45 or 50,000 hectares.
Okay, Ciaran, I was down in your neck of the woods down there yesterday, and I noticed there was a few ploughs going around, pulling up a bit of ground there yesterday. Is it as good or a bad situation? I'm not sure which is which down your part of the world. Is it similar to what Shay was talking about?
Yeah, I suppose, look, the figures are our best estimates, as Shay said. I think they're certainly, from what I can gather, better progress made in the northern half of the country rather than the southern half, obviously due to the heavy rain and stuff. So, that 1,000 hectares of winter barley, as Shay says, is very, very hard to estimate. The ploughing that's been done and a bit of sowing going on this week is welcome. Conditions are fair. That's all you could say. I mean, look, lads are putting in winter wheat, certainly. And I suppose, they're picking their fields. There's little bits that you might have to lift the drill and stuff. I haven't seen anything yet that's really good enough for winter barley, and I suppose that's the big crux in the system, really. I think the wheat, we're absolutely quite happy. If you want to deal with crows, obviously that's the caveat, but up to the middle of February, no issue whatsoever. Winter barley is a different story, though. Winter barley needs good seed beds, needs high seed rates, So I think seed bed is number 1, 2, and 3. What I've seen this week, Michael, certainly isn't good enough. From anything I've seen now, maybe look, there's drier ground in different parts of the country, but I think it's a real tough one with winter barley.
Okay, and Shay, just popping back to you in terms of what Ciaran's after saying there, is it certainly a little bit warmer down south, and there might be slightly different to maybe up around the northeast where it's a bit cooler, heavier ground, maybe slightly wetter ground. Is there still time to plant cereals up that side?
I suppose, again, taking all the caveats Ciaran was talking about there, Michael, in terms of soil conditions, and I mean, if normally you would say, yeah, probably there's still time to do it. The big caveat this year is soil conditions, and I suppose we've been through 2 months of really, really wet weather when we should be drilling, and that has had an impact on soil. So in those heavier soils up there, certainly talking to quite a number of potato farmers in the last couple of weeks, most of them are saying they're not going to plant potato ground, which is unusual. And that's really down to soil conditions after the harvest. It's just, soil conditions are very, very poor. So again, you'd have to pick your fields. And at this stage, if they haven't been drilled at this stage, you'd wonder why they haven't been drilled at this stage in that region. And I suppose that's the big issue. There probably still is an opportunity to do it. And that's more from the point of view, and I suppose guys will be looking at the more longer term issue in terms of rotation and possibly even workload, that they're going to look at the spring workload if they grow a lot of spring barley. And certainly the experience up that neck of the woods in the harvest just gone out is that spring barley in heavy ground planted late is not ideal either. So I think there's a combination of factors at play whereby farmers are thinking not just in immediate terms, they're thinking more long term and realizing that maybe we need to get a bit more wheat into the ground to maybe fulfill straw contracts or to reduce workload in the spring. So there are a couple of issues that people are thinking, mulling around their heads when they're continuing to decide whether to sow or not.
Just with that in mind, in terms of wheat, is second wheat an option this year, maybe over other years?
Yeah, Michael, just crunching the numbers there this morning. I suppose there's two big things here. Like the big one is spring seed. We know from the seed trade and, the harvest we had last year, spring seed is going to be very scarce. So, you might plan on sowing spring barley. You may or may not get the seed. It could be expensive. It mightn't be the variety that you're looking for. So I think that's the first thing. And as Shay said, we've had bad experiences with spring barley in, areas which wouldn't be traditional spring barley areas. So they're two massive ones to consider. I think if you look at the traditional winter barley slot, so you have your break crop, your winter wheat, and then your winter barley. So somebody might say, okay, soil conditions aren't good enough to sow winter barley, so I'll wait till the spring. And then all the issues I spoke about there with seed availability and that come into play. An option that might be worth looking at, it won't suit everyone, but certainly as a second wheat at this stage instead of that winter barley. We know we can successfully get a yield at this stage. Sowing later, the take-all risk is definitely there, but it's somewhat reduced by the late sowing, Disease pressure certainly will be lower, but you will take a lower yield than a first wheat. There's absolutely no question or doubt about that. And I was just crunching the numbers there, and a 9-ton crop of winter wheat would probably give you a similar margin to a 3-ton or 7.5-ton crop of spring barley. Thereabouts, So, I suppose then you make your call then on your type, on your land. Like, am I more likely to get 9 tons of winter wheat sown now, or 7.5 tons of spring barley sown in March? So that's something I wouldn't rule out, certainly wouldn't rule out.
We might maybe just turn a little bit, because we will be coming back to this topic again, I think, in episodes in the next couple of weeks. But I want to turn back to maybe something that growers might be having in mind for this week, given that the weather's after picking up a little bit, and it looks like there's a bit, hopefully, a week or so decent weather coming along the line. And it's really talking about the crops that are already in the ground and crops that have emerged through the ground. Majority of those don't have any weed control. Ciaran, what sort of factors should people consider before they would, I suppose, put the herbicide into the sprayer and go out spraying that ground?
Yeah, there's a good few things to consider. Obviously, firstly is the health of the crop. We've seen some patchy crops. Slugs have done a lot of damage in places. We've got some bare patches and fields. There might be decisions have to be made there as to whether it's a replanting operation or part of a field. Third one is ground conditions. Doesn't make any sense to go in and plough the place at this stage to go after weeds. And then the weeds that are present, I think, is a big factor. So if we're talking winter barley, you're probably pushing yourself to get in there if the crop is healthy, to get meadowgrass under control, or to get some level of control. If the crop is up, you're not going to get 100% control, which certainly will have a good cut off it. Winter wheat, obviously, there is a little bit more flexibility there in that we have good post-emergent grass weed products. So I think the level of grass weeds is probably number one, Michael. Obviously the health of the crop and the ground conditions are all that are number one. Then whether the type of crop, wheat or barley, you have more options with wheat, and then the level of potential grass weeds in the crop. I think they're the factors you'll be looking at anyway.
And would it be too early, Ciaran, to consider, I suppose, maybe a thin crop? I know you mentioned areas that might be gone, I suppose, or maybe there's very little in them in terms of wet conditions. But in terms of crops that are up reasonably well, and there's an amount of plants there, but they're a bit thin. Is it early to consider that yet, or Is that something that you can kind of follow up on maybe in the springtime when you see more tillers there?
I think if it's the crop that you're describing, it's probably a spring really before you make that call because, if you get mild weather over winter, we've often seen, especially in wheat, plants will recover and crops can produce a good few tillers. So if it's a patchy crop like that, I think it's a decision for the spring. There'll be some easy decisions where, there was waterlogging and stuff and there, obviously you're going to take some of those out possibly. But yeah, it really depends. Those ones you described are probably the spring, I'd say, Michael. Yeah.
Okay. Shay, just coming back to maybe we might just have a look at maybe the options on winter barley first, and considering what Shay is after saying in terms of a few of the caveats with, the type of weeds that are there and a healthy crop and that kind of thing. What sort of options would you consider are reasonable for some of those winter barley crops that are perhaps at, I don't know, probably the three to 4 leaf stage, maybe at this stage?
Ciaran gave a good kind of overview there, Michael, of what I'm seeing out there at the moment. There's a mixture of everything out there, and again, crop health has to be the first thing I think people have to decide on before they put in a herbicide. Because I mean, with winter barley, some of these herbicides can be a little bit unforgiving if conditions aren't right. So I suppose really what you're looking at is it'll be based on what weeds are there. Okay, so and I mean in our crop report there we have susceptibility charts, and I would be working off that in terms of deciding what product I'm going to use. So depending on what you're trying to control, so if you're trying to control something like poppy or something like that, I'd probably be still looking at something like a bit of flight or something along that line with the pendimethalin in it. And that'll give you reasonably good control of poppies and has good residual activity as well. If you're looking at some of the other weeds, then maybe likes of fumitree or something like that. I mean, Firebird Met gives which is the flufenicide and the diflufenicin based product, gives you quite good control there as well. And there's metribuzin in it as well. And I suppose though they're probably two of the main ones that people are going to look at the moment. Now, there are people talking about using the likes of Tower, and maybe, as Ciaran said there, maybe not going now, but maybe leaving something like that off until spring. And there are guys who've used that in the spring where crops have been under pressure or they haven't got conditions to go in. And it does kind of give reasonably good control late on in the season compared to some of the others. Like, I know they have growth stages there that you have to be aware of. Some of the flufenicid based products have a latest timing of growth stage 13. So you just need to be careful which product you're using. The likes of Nicito there, I think has a latest timing of 13. So they're probably up against that now. So again, you just have to be careful which product you're using and make sure you adhere to the label on it as well,
And Shay, just around the kind of grass weeds, I suppose meadowgrass being the one that probably is the major one, because I would it be right in saying that there's very little can be done for sterile brome in a winter barley situation now?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, flufenicid will give some control, but it's probably going to be very, very limited. Now, generally speaking, you would hope that most winter barley doesn't have a sterile brome problem, and that you're not going in there. And those guys that would have had it would have tried to get on a pre-emerge and follow it back in with a second application of flufenicid, which gives, I won't say even reason, because it gives you some control. Annual meadowgrass, as you say, is probably the one that most people are going off. And in my experience, flufenicid still gives quite good control, even post-emerge. And I've seen it before where people have gone in late. Does give quite good control on it, as does pendimethalin at this stage. Will give you reasonably good control of small weeds. Anything that's tillered now, if there are annual meadowgrass out there that have tillered, and I don't think, to be fair, I don't think there's that many of them. They'll struggle to control those. But most weeds, like the barley at this stage, have struggled as well. So they're under as much pressure, really, in a lot of cases, as the crop is itself. And that again might be an issue too. I mean, if you have a weed that's struggling as well, it might not be growing as well, mightn't take up the chemical as well. It might be slow enough control, and it might take a bit of time for you to see an effect on the herbicide at this stage. And they will be slower acting than they would have been, say, if they were applied a month ago.
Okay. And Ciaran, maybe turn into wheat. Is something similar again, is it? Or is there a few more options that might be open in wheat?
Yeah, I think it's more nuanced. Like Shay said, winter barley is straightforward. If you have a good healthy crop, get in there as soon as you can, because that will give you the best control of annual meadowgrass in particular. So I think that's easier. I think wheat is slightly different, and it may be a little bit more of a programmed approach. Again, I'm taking a crop that's healthy, and you're working with it. So, I think you have good options for the autumn in the likes of Alistair Flex, which will give you good coverage with the DFF in it, which are broadleaf weeds, and then you obviously have your meadowgrass and brome there as well. You also have all the winter barley options that Shay mentioned as well. I suppose another approach that people tend to take in winter wheat nowadays, especially in a grassweed scenario, is maybe get the likes of annual meadowgrass tidied up. So go in there with maybe a flufenicet based product, which tend not to be overly expensive. Get the likes of meadowgrass under control, give you good coverage on other weeds as well, obviously, and then maybe plan for a follow up in the spring would be one option with the likes of Broadway Star. I think and which is really good brome product. You'll get your wild oats there, and I think that's an approach a lot of people have taken in recent years. But there is good flexibility, and I think just to get in, now if you can do it, and the crop is healthy, I still think it's a good thing to do. As I say, with any of the winter barley options that Shay said, or alternatively, just get in with something that pendimethalin base or a flufenicet base, get your meadowgrass under control, widens the window then for the spring. You've got your even Pacifica, or as I say, your likes of Broadway Star a little bit later into the season then, which will cover your wild oats as well.
I've seen the likes of Alistair Flex working quite well in the past, and it seems to do a reasonably good job. But does it lack a little bit of residual control on the meadowgrasses? Would you be in any way worried about that, Ciaran?
Yeah, look, it's contact obviously being ALS, so that's the big thing there. I suppose and it really does depend on what you have in the field. If you are targeting and you have potentially a big problem there, as I said, you might be better off going with a pendimethalin flufenicet base and following up. The likes of Alistair Flex is probably very suitable, up to maybe the end of January, where you have a field that's reasonably clean. It might be a one shot solution.
I just want to return to it because I think it is a bit of an issue out there, certainly. And I've driven the country, I suppose, over the last little while and looking over the hedges and ditches and that. There's certainly an issue out there, Shay, in terms of, there's some of those crops out there that are a little bit marginal in places and maybe in larger places. What if some of those areas, those crops get an overall herbicide application, very big pre-emerge kind of scenario in it, but next spring some of those areas are deemed unviable. They just didn't till right. They're just not good enough. Something's going to have to be done with them. Does the application of that residual herbicide hinder the planting of anything or an alternative crop to go into those areas afterwards?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Michael, because we've seen this before. Every other year we see problems with crops, and there's a herbicide going on, and you're wondering then, is that going to impact on the following crop? And it's something you have to be careful of when determining what product you're using. So if you're using the likes of a pendimethalin based product, be it Flight or Stomp or some of those products, I mean, it is very residual, so it does hang around in the soil quite a while. And flufenicet probably not as much, but DFF would be pretty similar. They hang around the soil quite a bit. So again, you would, depending on the product that you use, you'd need to go back and read the label or ring the supplier and see what are their restrictions and what crops you can sow after applying those, because the labels do differ and the products do differ, again, based on their weed profile and what weeds they're trying to control. Most of them, especially if you're in a non-inversion system, most of them will recommend that you actually cultivate to 15 centimeters. So that means in a lot of cases you're having to plow. So again, it's just another nuanced problem with those. If you're in a direct drill system or a min-till system, if a plow-based system, most of them are okay. You're plowing anyway, and you can drill away. But again, it's something you just probably need to read on the label before you apply. If you're in that situation, you think there might be an issue there. This could potentially be an issue for you in the spring. So I would say before you apply, read the labels, and on all the labels it will tell you what the following crops you can sow in the event of a crop failure, and more importantly, the time frame that you have to leave. Like I think flight is something like 5 months or something like that, whereas flufenicid is 12 weeks or something.
It holds even in the case where you're sown, you have a cereal in and you have a residual cereal herbicide on, and you're coming back, say, with spring barley again, which is again a cereal that the rules of thumb of which you're talking about there that still applies, does it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think for most of them. Yeah.
Right, certainly something to be aware of for people with.
And sorry, Michael, just while I am thinking of it, it is something. There are people out there talking about maybe applying herbicides in the spring, and again, it's something just to be conscious of too for a lot of winter barley crops, maybe where you might be going with something like oilseed rape afterwards. That the same rules would apply, you know.
Okay, and I suppose in some of those ones they can push out, that might have an effect even in oilseed rape over the next year as well. So
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Ciaran, finally, maybe talk about winter oats. Maybe they're not as crucial. Maybe there's some in the ground certainly, but is there something or options of herbicides that people maybe should be thinking about in winter oats as well now at this stage?
Yeah, look, where we started in the program, the area winter oats is very small, but look, I'm sure there are some growers out there that did manage to get it in. The herbicide range is extremely limited. Really, in the autumn, you're just talking about DFF, which does, in fairness, give you good cover on broadleaf weeds. If conditions are good and the crop is healthy, I wouldn't have any issue getting in there. And I suppose the big thing is it's very cost effective. It's really, really, really cost effective. Failing that, I suppose the majority of winter oats, just given soil conditions, and generally when they're sown, you're generally waiting till the spring, getting in maybe half 3/4 rate of an SU and an appropriate mixture based on the weed spectrum there. You're just talking broadleaf weeds, obviously, anyway. So I think from a cost benefit perspective, DFF in the autumn is really good. Can be a little bit hard at times. So again, the weather would be a factor there, and the health of the crop would be something to watch. But if you can do it, great. Alternatively, then Michael, it's a spring application.
Okay, Ciaran, thanks very much. And certainly, I suppose the thing I'm getting out of this is that the number one thing to be aware of is the crop health. See what way your crop is before you start doing anything at all, and figure out the weeds that you have in the field, and try and line up the appropriate herbicides from that end of it. Guys, Ciaran and Shay, thanks very much for your time, and look, we'll be chatting to you again shortly.
No problem, Michael.
Thank you.
So that's it for this week, and a huge thanks to Ciaran and Shay for joining me on the show. Next week, we will have the second part of a 2-part series on land drainage with Pat Toohey, a researcher in Teagasc. Pat will talk about tackling ponding in the middle of fields and how the subsoils have a huge bearing and the type of drainage system which should be used. So finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.